Good morning, everyone. I was saying earlier, we actually judge how good the event party was, the attendee party was, with how many people rock up on the first session of the last day. Looks like it was a pretty good party. So well done to all you diehards that have made it out of bed and come and joined us here for the morning. My name is Gareth Ireland. I am what we call a UC architect for a team out of MCS HQ, so it's Microsoft Consulting Services in Redmond. Pretty long name, Enterprise Communications Center of Excellence. Really what we do is we guide the field within Microsoft in terms of new initiatives, training, network assessments, big end deals. We help with the pre-sales on that, as well as the post-sales high-level deployment. So it's a team of about 20 Lync masters, I think. Okay, so it's a pretty formidable bunch of us. But so what we do is we get very involved in these events. So I'm based out of South Africa. I get involved in the MEA region. Okay, so I live in Johannesburg, South Africa, work all the way up to Istanbul, Turkey, across to Nigeria, across to the Persian Gulf. So it's a pretty big area. But yeah, keeps me on my toes. So thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about planning for PSTN conferencing. PSTN conferencing has really been never covered in one slide deck, I don't believe, at any of our events. It's always a couple of slides that are in a planning for conferencing deck, but never really something that gets its own attention. And that's really what we're here to do today, is to pay attention just to that modality, look at the business benefits end-to-end, what you can expect to get out of deploying Lync conferencing, audio conferencing internally, and see what you can look at from a savings perspective there. We'll look at what we can do, the new features that have come out with Lync 2013 in terms of PSTN conferencing. We're also going to move on and look at some of the more planning and configuration considerations that you need to do. Okay, so if you're there for that, also if you were here for Doug Lottie, he's not here. You may have noticed. Okay, so he's at another session, so I'll be looking after you for this one. So what we hope to achieve here is we just want to go through, understand what the real business benefits are for your organization. Is there anyone in here that is kind of a business decision maker in terms of, are we going Lync, aren't we going Lync? Just to gauge the audience here. No? There we go. There's one there. And welcome. Thank you. So, and the rest of us, are we more on the architect / consultant / technical side of things? Okay, and we're looking to deploy this. Stop me if I'm wrong. We're looking to deploy this. We have deployed this. We maybe want to see how we can scale this out in our organization. So hopefully you'll get the relative importance from this. We'll just look at the business values. We'll look at the new features, do some planning. Let's just move into it. So this is a fairly old slide. We first introduced dial-in conferencing back in OCS 2007 R2. Okay, and it was pretty rudimentary, dial in, do a bit of conferencing, but these slides, it's quite good. If I've gone back and looked at these slides and looked what we hoped to achieve then and what we have achieved now, it's dead in line with what we wanted to do. We looked at conferencing behavior, and we'll see later in Gardner's report, and we said that 85% of all calls are fairly small calls, okay? So they're very ad hoc type of calls, quick drag somebody into a conference, and that is not a functionality that you could have with an ACP. You would subscribe to a service, it would be all outsourced. So we thought, with this audio conferencing, we have an audio conferencing MCU. How can we bring that modality in? So part of our goals were to bring that functionality in for small to medium meetings, to be able to make it easy to join. We don't want a complicated, if anybody's joined a traditional or even some hosted ACP, it's not the greatest experience on the phone. You have to join in. If you're a leader, you need a code. If you need another leader, or you're a participant, you've got another long code to put in, then an entry key, and it just becomes pretty unpleasant. So we wanted that to be easy. We wanted it to be a seamless integration between all our modalities. So we want to have a meeting where we're sharing content. We've got video. We've got somebody out there dialing in. So really a seamless converged communications experience. We're really looking at anything below the 1,000 user mark, okay? So that was really where we're going. So for the 85% of it, we feel and we know we can take that on in-house, okay, and reduce costs in that space. The other, multi-town hall type meetings, financial reports, things like that happen on a bi-yearly event, those kind of things you'll take to traditional ACP type vendor. Okay, so as we mentioned, this is some statistics from the Gartner report. So if we look at 85% in alignment with what we spoke about back in 2009 when we had R2, 85% of those are reservationless, ad hoc type calls that involve less than 25 people. Okay, another 10% are operator-oriented, so more than 25, typically 25 to 100 people. And then you have the hosted, managed event type things like the financial broadcasts that are up to, whatever the organization is. Okay, so we really don't want to spend time in that space. But what are we good at? So if we look at this space here, and we're really creeping, if you see this, we're really creeping on the, sorry, it's not going to work on this side, but if you look on the third block, we're creeping quite rapidly towards the right-hand side of the page here, okay? As you see, we started off with, our limitation in terms of meeting size with 25, typically on a hosted solution, allowing support, probably 18 months ago for large meetings, so taking that up to 1,000 participants in a meeting with a dedicated pool architecture. So you can see we're actually moving in that direction, and who knows what the future is going to be, but that is really where our strong point is. If you look at our main pillars here in terms of what we hope to achieve with our communication platform, we're looking at the first one that comes up is always reduce cost, okay? I think everyone's in the same game that UC, no matter what form, is going to reduce costs, is going to reduce risk to your organization. People aren't going to have to travel for meetings, so they're going to be leveraging things like audio conferencing, video conferencing, web conferencing to reduce costs there. But notice what's on the second line here. Reducing audio conferencing service charges. Okay? To me, when I speak to my customers, this is the one quick win that the customer can get. Some of these things like reducing travel, things like that are sometimes hard to be tangible, and it takes a period of time for you to realize that value out of the technology. Okay? You could say after a year, hey, we've saved $1 million. Okay? But if you're having a subscription fee to an ACP of, $400,000 in a month, okay, which is a particular example I'm busy with now, within, 2 or 3 months of actually rolling out Enterprise Voice or rolling out Lync as a platform, you can cut those costs by 85%. I mean, that would be appealing to your customers, wouldn't it? Okay? And if you go and you look here, you can actually see highlighted on the second line there that we envisaged, okay, based on our own experience, based on big customer deployments, to reduce that cost from 30% to as much as 95%. Okay? Can anyone tell me who the 95% end of the scale was? Anybody? Microsoft. There we go. Prize for that gentleman over there. He was the first one. Thank you. There we go. That's correct. It was Microsoft. So within a year of us deploying full-scale Lync across the organization, actually at this stage it was 2007 or 2, we reduced our ACP costs, subscription costs, by 95%. And if you actually go and read the latest Forrester Total Economic Impact document on Lync 2013, you'll see they have 7 examples there of how companies save themselves money. And they range in this space. So this, for me, even if we're having debates about codecs and things like this has got to be a win for your customer. Okay, so I encourage you to pursue this, and this is a great quick win for you and your customers. So let's have a look at, most of the traditional features are there when it comes to PSTN conferencing. We'll look at features now. But if you're going to see what we've introduced in the last, in 2013, one of the key features that came out is we want to be able to have non-EV users, okay, from a licensing perspective, this has an impact, But non-EV uses the ability to actually make a dial-out during a conference call. Okay, so we have dial-in functionality as well as dial-out functionality. And we wanted to give them that. The challenge that we had was how do we, give them a policy to enable them to actually make that call. Okay, so that was always the challenge. So we thought we had to do that. Okay, before it would actually rely on static routes out of that particular wherever the MCU was being hosted to actually make that call. That was a bit risky, I would think. Okay, but then we brought that in and we made it that they can actually use the organizer's policy to do that. Also, in the last 18 months and with the advent of 2013, you've seen huge developments in our mobile clients. Okay, so joining, we've had plenty developments in terms of join experience from the mobile, being able to do things like call via work, being able to join via wireless. So that's also been a great experience that we've pushed on. Again, the key thing here is allowing anonymous participants in a meeting. So if they're anonymous or they're users that don't have EV enabled, so they don't have a tell URI, the ability to actually use, as long as they can get hold of a conferencing, get hold of a voice policy within the meeting. It could be the organizer's policy. Okay, if the organizer doesn't even have EV, then they're going to go look at the site policy or the global policy to make a call out of that conference. Okay, so this helps us secure. We don't have rogue static routes within our voice deployment. So that's a big one for us. If we look at the feature set here, as we've developed the product from 2007 R2 to what we have today, you'll see there's been quite an advancement in terms of bringing the traditional ACP type functions to the solution. Big ones, obviously, in 2010 was when we brought on DTMF and traditional DTMS functionality. Excuse me. And then, pretty much if you see on the right-hand side of the scale here, we've got all bases covered. And you'll notice the things that we don't do is in the operator space, okay? Which is pretty much in alignment with what we've been speaking about regarding our goals, okay? So we don't want to get into that space just yet. But you can see, just to call a couple of things out, we have exit announcements now with our conferencing announcement service. We have DTMF, one that I do fairly often. I work in an organization where I could be, I work around the clock in terms of globes and time zones. So while I'm in the car, it might be morning time, 8 o'clock call in Redmond, but I'm in the car on my way somewhere else, So I just go on, hit *6, and off I go. Then I'm on mute for that thing. Just a pretty quick eye chart there in terms of what the DTMF commands are. These can be customized, okay, if you so wish. Like I say, some that I use fairly often. I don't often lead audio conferences myself, to be honest. But the mute one comes in very handy. If you're a leader, you can use things like toggle silent mode. Okay, so you don't have your participants going, not muting, creating havoc in the meeting with background noise, etc. So those are really, really important. Another thing that we brought on from our OCS days, came in Lync 2010, is our entrance and exit announcements. Okay, so when you join the call, you will either join with a PIN, you'll authenticate with your PIN, or you will actually authenticate, or you'll just say your name. Either way, when you get into the meeting, it will either do a voice to text or a text to voice based on your authenticated name, or it would just play that recorded name out to the participants so that they know who's joining. In terms of PIN management and PIN simplification, so we brought that into our web page. Okay, so not much has changed in that space. Just making it a lot easier for people to get access to their PIN, to modify their PIN, and that is pretty simple. So, we'll look at some simple examples here. So this is my mailbox. If I want to go set up a call here, I would just go and set up a new appointment, make it a Lync appointment. Here you can see I've got a couple of options when I go into this meeting here. Okay, you'll see I have a join number. That's a South Africa join number. I've also got this forget your PIN. So if I did forget my PIN, and I very seldom use it, I could just simply go into this website here it would take me through, and you can see this is the dial-in page. So dial-in page here is going to tell us exactly, all the different regions. So you can see here Microsoft has a few regions. Pretty intimidating. So we've got a lot of regions here. And I might also, we'll come back to regions, but I might also want to utilize some of these based on where my callers are. Okay, so it comes down to a lot of user behavior and best practice. So pretty important to enable your users and train your users on how to use this. If I'm having a call with 10 people in Redmond, and I'm sitting in South Africa, okay, even though my MCU is in Redmond, I'm on the Redmond server. If I was on a South African server, I would host that conference would be hosted there. Does this make sense for 10 people from Redmond to phone South Africa to make that call? Or should I rather move my call and say, okay, the access number's in Redmond, I'll join via Lync from South Africa, and we can do the call. So that's another thing. But let's get back to pin number here. So we can just go here. And should I read this one out? I've seen it happen. And then you can see I can go in, I can go reset my PIN. There's my current PIN. If I want to go and reset my PIN, it's pretty easy for me to authenticate via that.
Can I ask you a question about this?
Definitely.
We're using audio conferencing today. You're a very heavy audio conferencing company.
Yeah.
We ran into a problem where we have users who are not enterprise voice who need a PIN, and we found they could not reset their PIN unless we put a fake phone number in.
Yeah.
And this is what Microsoft told us to do. I mean, is there another way to do this, or is that the only workaround?
That is the only workaround at this stage, I'm afraid, that I'm aware of, to be honest. So the question was, for the recording, if we have non-enabled EV users and we want them to authenticate with a PIN, how would we do that? And we would have to give them a bogus tell URI to be able to go in and do that. It's all based on your extension, right? So that's what the
We gave a 555 number and made the extension their employee ID.
Yeah. Okay.
That way we knew it would be totally bogus. But I'm just curious if there was another way.
Yeah, not at the stage that I'm aware of. That's probably something that would be addressed in a CU, and I haven't seen anything in a CU, but we can certainly follow that up for you. No problem. All right, so here you see, so I've given you all enough time to write down my access code here, my PIN number for, okay, to get in, but I'll be sure to go and change this. So we'll get back to this. Also, while we're in this space, also we were speaking about the numbers that we want to use. So when I'm setting up a meeting here, a couple of things to notice within this meeting request. If you go here, you'll see that I have a unique conference ID over there, okay, with our new join.microsoft.meet, and you'll see this lowercase number here. I can actually choose to go and change that. If I go into meeting, the way that it's worked now, when we moved to 2010, in OCSR2, every time we set up a meeting was a new conference ID, okay, so that became quite difficult to manage, and it was, long join experience. Now when we go in, we all get the same, so we have a dedicated conferencing container applied to us, which is great, makes things a little bit easier. But there are instances where you have back-to-back meetings and one overruns the next and people stumble into your meeting. It's kind of like people stumbling into your door. So you might actually choose to actually make a new meeting space every single time. So you can go and control that from the meeting options. So every time I set up a meeting, or for certain meetings, I can go and specify that this is actually a new conference ID so that no one else would have access to this. All right. Other things that I can do? Yeah?
You in 2013?
No, that's been there.
Since 2010?
That's been there since 2010. But
But we can control that from the server side too, right?
you can, yeah. You can control that with your conferencing policies from the server side. But if a user chooses, okay, for ease of use, my general meetings, I can use my generic conference ID that's assigned to me, then we can do that. But for a specific meeting I don't want people stumbling into, I can go and generate a specific conferencing ID for that.
Now, on the server side, you've set it up to have unique meeting IDs. Can the user still override that?
No, I can't do that. Okay, on the phone side, so we mentioned about all these phone numbers that we have. And I might be in a call, like I mentioned, where I have 10 people from, let's call it the UK that are joining. So I might decide, okay, I actually want to go and change this so that the number here changes to South Africa, to London. So I want to go in here, change that to London. So, okay, and you can see that it's added the London numbers there. So when people are on mobile and email, they want to go into that meeting, they will actually go and see now that there's new meetings there. So that's pretty neat. So it's just a bit of general housekeeping in terms of how we've changed our meetings to make them more, here we go, to make them more user-friendly, a lot more easy to manage features within the meeting, a lot easier to get to things like the dial-in page, etc. We've also introduced multi-language support, so we can allocate a language to a region. We can also allocate a language to a conferencing attendant contact. And we'll get more into this in terms of how that actually works. So let's have a quick look here at some audio conferencing architecture. So as we all know, one of the great things about Lync is that the back-end infrastructure is fairly simple. We have front-end servers. Front-end servers host a multitude of MCUs. They host the IM MCU, the application sharing MCU, and probably the biggest one here is the audio MCU, the AV MCU at the bottom over there. Obviously, we need to realize that for us to, when we're planning conferencing, we need to get the fundamentals right. So in terms of our conferencing architecture, before we even start worrying about building around that in terms of access numbers, where to put our gateways, where to put our conferencing announcement services, etc. So key in terms of audio conferencing is on the front end, each front end will have a conferencing audio attendant running. Okay, so this is what you speak to. Welcome to Microsoft Audio Conferencing. That's the conferencing audio attendant that you have. Then in terms of on each server where I actually set up a meeting, so I might be in a different server to where the access number is. So the access number will always come to the conferencing audio attendant. But my MCU might actually be where I've set up the meeting, could be on another server. And that runs the conferencing announcement service. Okay? That is unique to where I've actually set that up. Within that conferencing announcement service, we have the personal virtual assistant. So this is the virtual assistant that's just going to talk to me. Okay? If I have language requests and I've selected a language and I go on mute, that's the personal virtual assistant that actually talks to me. If there's communication with the entire conference, that's the group virtual assistant. And we'll see how that works. Also, a key component here, as I've shown you, is the dial-in conferencing page, where we can go and look at numbers, where we get our number information from, as well as where we get our, where we can reset our PIN. So the conferencing announcement service component is very unique, as I said, to where we actually host the MCU. So if I'm in South Africa and I set up a call in South Africa, then that South Africa will have its own CAS. Okay, so the CAS is set up, or the conferencing service is set up there. We'll get our own audio attendant. Okay, if the number is residing there, so if it terminates there, we'll get an audio attendant and a personal virtual assistant. So this is, as I said, what speaks to us. So how does it work from a multi-language support? If I have someone dialing in, okay, and that's speaking English, okay, the voice applications will come and there'll be one conferencing service, conferencing announcement service. That will then allocate an English group assistant, group virtual assistant. And for that particular user, so it's allocated one group virtual assistant. For that language, it's allocated a personal virtual assistant, particularly for that user. Okay, so for caller 1. So what if somebody comes on and joins the call on the next one? Okay, is it going to set up another English GVA? I don't think so. Doesn't make sense. So it's just going to set up another personal virtual assistant to speak to that one. So the group will be using the English group will be using the A for that particular English, and each user. Now a French user comes on board, selects French when it speaks to auto attendant. That's going to go and set up another group assistant for French, and it's going to set up a personal virtual assistant for that. All right, so just an indication how that works.
Those languages have to be set up on the server.
Yeah, they need to be allocated to a region, okay, for you to dial into that region, and then you would be able to. So this is obviously pretty handy. We don't do translation, you know, it doesn't do translation. We haven't figured that one out yet, but all your announcements, your welcome announcements, that'll all be in your native language for that. So let's take a quick look here. Any questions at this time? We all good? We all still awake? Just checking. Okay. Just a side note, everyone enjoy the party? Yes. I thought it was pretty cool. What a club, eh? Pretty cool. But I had to get home early and prep, so anyway. So let's have a look at the dial-in experience here and what actually happens under the hood there. If we have a caller out here, dial in, they could be on their mobile. It'll have an incoming call set up, so it'll do signaling immediate to where that number terminates and is hosted, which will be on the mediation server. The mediation server will then send it to the next hop, okay, whatever its next hop is in terms of a front-end server. The front-end server will then take it, and this is just a voice call, right? So it's going to do inbound routing on this. Inbound routing is really just going to say, okay, I have this number coming in. Let me take this E164 number, and let me see if I can find a SIP URI for this. This SIP URI just happens to be a conferencing auto attendant. So it goes and finds a conferencing auto attendant. Conferencing auto attendant then says, okay, mediation server goes back, says, give me your conference ID, and that's where we sit and we type in our 9-digit code there. Once it does that, it goes and looks up the conference ID, and now it's trying to find that conference directory that is hosting this call. Okay? In this particular example, it might not actually exist in pool 1. Okay, I might be phoning a number in South Africa, but it was somebody that set up the call in Redmond. So now it's going to terminate in South Africa. It's going to go speak to auto conferencing attendant. And then what it's going to do is pretty much do like a consultative transfer now. Okay, so the conferencing attendant is going to join the conference on my behalf. Okay, so it's going to drop that leg with the front-end server. It's going to join. It's going to figure out, okay, this conference is actually somewhere else. It picks up the conference ID, figures that it's on another pool, then transfers the call to there. Okay, goes and joins the pool, and basically then does a re-invite back to the mediation server and bridges the call through to the MCU that in the right area, on the right pool. So this is how it works. I mean, it's no different to a generic kind of enterprise voice call. Okay, inbound routing gets applied. We find a contact. We then ask for a conferencing ID. That'll tell us where it is, and then we'll do a consultative transfer across to that server. So these conferencing IDs, these are conferencing containers. So just a couple of these will be created by default. You know, it's a numeric ID for each conference. What we say is in a large organization, if you've got, you know, we want to try and keep that number to a minimum. So if you go here and we look at this case again, and I go and set up my Lync meeting again here. You notice that we have, I think it's a 9-digit code here for a conferencing ID. Okay. Bear in mind that there are 120,000 people at the last time I checked in Microsoft. Okay. How many meetings do they have every day? Okay. So it's going to generate quite a lot of conference IDs, and this can get somewhat out of hand. So if you're doing that, we recommend, if you've got large organizations of that scale, then we recommend that you actually set up a conference ID for every 1,000 or 999 users. Okay, that'll just allow that to bring those numbers down to a 9-digit code and have a better control over that. So that's something to consider going forward. Another thing to consider is what is the join experience for that for a dial-in user from a phone, okay, when they're dialing into a conference. So in Lync 2010, we introduced this concept of lobbying, so going into lobby. So obviously key to this is, am I invited? You know, what type of meeting type is this? So we can set meeting types within a meeting to just the organizer, okay, which is probably the most secure version of it. We can set it up to only people that I have invited, so we can't have that meeting forwarded to other people. We can't have those people come into that meeting. Or just anybody from this company, so anybody on that SIP URI, you know, of Microsoft.com can actually join this meeting. Okay, right down to open for everyone. Okay, so we allow anybody in there. General theme here is if I'm authenticated either via my PIN or I'm via my Lync client, I should go straight through into the meeting. But if I'm coming from a phone and I'm an anonymous user, I don't have a PIN, I'm going to go into a lobby, and that's going to wait for the organizer to actually let me in. Okay, so the organizer's on a phone. They will hear tones that there are people in the lobby. They use DTMF to get into the lobby and let those people access the lobby. All right. Now, dial-out conferencing. So this is a very, very handy feature that we use. Okay, there's many different scenarios where this can come in. So you could have just simply somebody out on a mobile number where you're actually saying, hey, I'm going to be on my phone. Why don't you just drag me into the call? That's happened a lot. You know, I could be sitting in traffic, late for a meeting, so they just call me in. I could be a traditional PBX user, okay, that's sitting on another platform that wants to take part in the meeting. Maybe that's in a different office, okay? So I will just do an outbound enterprise voice call to that via my mediation server. The other one is and increasingly popular one now, is using the mobile client to do call via work. So call via work means that I'm going to say, call me, okay, I'm going to join the meeting. It's going to know what number I'm phoning from, okay? It's going to phone me back, okay? It's going to drop that call. It's going to phone me back, and it's going to bridge it, okay? So we used to call that outside voice control way back when. The other one is on the mobile client with 2013 was using wireless, okay? Being able to use the wireless functionality. So on the mobile client, it will always try wireless, okay, before it then tries GSM, you know, 3G type thing, and then GSM type calling. So configuration to be aware of. Again, just want to really touch on the new ones, which is the new, non-EV feature. So we spoke about this a bit earlier in terms of enabling that conferencing policy. So there's a switch in the conferencing policy now to actually allow, I think we saw it earlier, to allow anonymous people to dial out of a conference, okay? Again, if that organizer does, so all we need is a voice policy to be able to do this, okay? Typically, an organizer would have a voice policy and a tel URI, so they would be EV enabled. But if that's not there, then it will fall back and use the site policy. If that's not there, it will fall back and use the global voice policy for that organization. Just a bit of a process flow, how it works. So if a user in the call actually generates it, it'll first request, is this a mobile user? If it is, it's going to use that particular mobile user. If they're logged into a Lync client, it's going to use their voice policy. If it's not, and they consider it an anonymous user, it's really just going to go straight through and use the, if it is an authenticated user, it's going to use the user's policy. If nothing, it's going to use the organizer's policy and then fail back. Cool. I need some questions, guys, because I've got some. If anyone needs to phone their family, yes.
So, from an EV license standpoint, in order to have call out, you know, the organizer has to have an EV license.
Yeah. For an outbound call, that's an enterprise voice call, so that needs to be covered. Dial-in, though, is not the case. So. Yeah, it's the. I even get confused a little bit with our licensing on this one, but so that's as it stands right now.
If we have 100 organizers, we need to have 100 EV licenses.
Yeah, that's it. Cool. Or you get yourself $10 to phone your family on Skype. Or whoever else you want to call. Thank you. Okay, all good. So next thing we need to think about and consider is how are we going to plan this? And before we actually, worry about audio conferencing and dial-in conferencing, we need to make sure that our conferencing architecture, from a front-end perspective, needs to be pretty solid, okay? So we need to make sure that that AV MCU, okay, that's on the front-end server needs to be properly planned, properly scaled. If we're going to do things like HA and DR, that needs to be in place to support our dial-in conferencing. So just basic conferencing planning. It's more of a reference slide for you guys. We would go through, so I don't know if anybody here has used the Lync planning tool. Okay, this is pretty much the same flow that they've used within the Lync planning tool. Am I going to enable web conferencing? Am I going to enable AV conferencing? So far, this is only internal. And then am I going to enable PSTN dial-in conferencing? And there's a couple of things to consider here. Okay, firstly, where are my termination points going to be? All right, so how many regions am I going to support? We were speaking earlier about a gentleman here who has 3 regions scattered throughout the world. There are a couple of different options that we can do. Okay, are we going to use SIP trunking? Are we going to do termination of PRIs to a particular region, have the calls hosted there? There's a bit of thinking to do there. Plan those access numbers. All right, we've got a lot of tools out there. We've got a bandwidth planning tool that will also help you calculate what your Erlang should be. So it'll take, your busy hour minutes, help you figure out how many E1 lines you need to support that. So that's the kind of thing we'll look at. And then you would enable it on a user base, enable them for dial-in conferencing, enable your policies to support dial-in conferencing. This is pretty, I'm sure most people here are familiar with this. Pretty generic setup. We have a central site. That central site will have a pool. Pool will need, if we're going to do HA, we would need 3, okay? Anybody here know why we need 3 front-end servers to maintain HA? Eh? That's it. Good job. So that's part of Windows Fabric. So Windows Fabric needs 3 to maintain quorum, and it's also best practice if you're going to be doing any kind of maintenance, bringing a server down, still supporting your workload. That's best practice to do that. So we would just have typically a solid foundation in terms of planning for our front-end pool. In this particular case, it's just one site. Then we would actually start considering things like, how are we going to do access to this? Okay, we need to give access to our mobile clients. Okay, for them to actually use a mobile client to dial or to access the conference and generate call via work. So we need edge infrastructure and web publishing infrastructure for that. We need connectivity to the PSTN. So this can happen in a number of ways. The PSTN, SIP trunking's, a real benefit in terms of cost savings. So speak to your providers in terms of how can we use SIP trunking to get the best out of their cloud as well as our cloud to reduce costs on these calls, okay, for the people dialing in. Obviously, if we're dialing out to people, that's a company cost, so that's also very important to give that special consideration in terms of how you're going to reach out to the PSTN. From an HA perspective, so at least 3 front-end servers, okay? If you are, if you're doing standard edition, obviously there's no HA in standard edition. There's resiliency, so you can pair standard pools for resiliency, but from an HA perspective, you won't have that. Then from a DR perspective, we can use pool pairing now in 2013. So pool pairing will actually replicate data between pools, okay, so we can fail over. So this means that our MCUs are covered, okay? We'll have to provision a new MCU, but those will be covered and our conferencing directories will be covered from a resiliency perspective.
Does that pairing have to be to like standard edition?
Yeah. And it's based obviously from a scaling perspective. So here we have an example of a pool with 3 servers. needs to go over to 3 servers, okay? You can't exactly have, a huge deployment that maybe you need 6 front-end servers, but your resiliency plan is to have 3 servers, okay? I know, there's obviously cost to be considered there, but if you now fail over, 200,000 people on a 6-node pool to 3 nodes, that thing's gonna sweat. So you need special consideration in terms of how you scale these. So what happens here, as soon as we set up pool pairing between 2 pools, we have this backup service that actually runs between both the pools, and it replicates database information between the 2. So conferencing IDs, MCUs get replicated between the 2. So a key point there is make sure that your conferencing setup is solid from the start. Moving on to dial-in conferencing. So now these are special things that we need to consider. We know that we have our infrastructure solid. We've got connectivity to the PSTN via our mediation server. Here's 9 key points that we need to think about. First thing is we need to know the capacity and how many, what regions are we going to have to support this in, and how many users, what is our expected profiles of calls that are going to come in. Okay, so we have our Lync bandwidth planning tool. Is everyone familiar with that? Okay, Lync bandwidth planning tool will give you a lot of insight into this. There's also, when you're doing the Lync bandwidth planning tool, key to that is setting up your personas. I always, when I'm with customers, I liken the Lync bandwidth planning tool to a sausage machine. What you get in is ultimately what you're going to get out at the end. And what you put in at the beginning is your personas and your user models. If you get that wrong, it's going to be wrong at the end of that. Okay, so that is a key component, not just for dial-in conferencing. Whenever you're speaking to customers, just bear that in mind. That's pretty important. So plan for additional DID numbers. Okay, if you've got terminating numbers from your provider, and you're looking to bring 100,000 minutes, just to pick a random number, 100,000 minutes off of your ACP internally, you're going to have multiple numbers for that in each region. Okay, so understand what type of Erlangs and how many E1s you're going to need, and dedicated numbers for that one. Okay, configure your dial plans. Hopefully most of us have enterprise voice set up in our organization. If not, we need to go and set up dial plans. So dial plan is a collection of normalization rules, policies, PSTN usages, but we really just need that location profile, okay, so that we can amend that to some sort of region, okay? So that's important. So plan your dial plans and configure those. Deploy your PSTN gateways or configure SIP trunking to your provider. That's pretty straightforward. Configure access numbers globally, so give special configuration consideration. We were speaking earlier about a 3-site type of deployment, okay? And what is best? Do we go terminate at each site? Do we use a central site for conferencing? Do we use our SIP trunk provider for this? These are all things that need to be considered. Okay, things to think about there is, what if we lose WAN connectivity? Okay, do we have resiliency from that perspective? All right, so that's important. It depends on the culture and the nature of how you're going to actually use this technology. What else? Configure DTMF commands per site. So, we provide a generic model for DTMF. You might want to enhance that, okay, and change those per site, have a particular model for that. Change your PIN configuration, your PIN policy. Okay, by default now, pins never expire. That's the default policy. You might want to change that, okay, and have people come in and renew their PIN just to make that more secure. You would have to enable your users for dial-in conferencing, all right? And anything there, you can, once you create that, you can actually, via PSTN, PowerShell script on the server, you can send them a message telling them to reset their PIN, because you're just going to give them a generic PIN when you set them up. So these are all a couple of things to consider. As you may notice, one of the more complex things is, where am I going to put my regions? Where am I going to put my numbers? These are things we're going to have to think about. So it all starts with your dial plan. Okay, if we have organizations that don't have any enterprise voice deployed, they will have a global dial plan, you know. That's out the box. But you want to actually set up dial plans for each region. This is what I would suggest. So you'd have a dial plan for Singapore, London, and New York, for instance. You would then go and associate those dial plans with a region, okay, which matches that. Then each of those regions would actually get access numbers. Okay, so you may want to give New York, you know, it's a very busy hub. You maybe have a lot of people connecting there. You might want to give them a hunt group with 20 numbers as a random number. Okay, so it's key that they actually access plenty. Also important now when we move into what is in our web page in terms of dialing conferencing is what is the name? So give it a friendly name. Okay, we need to allocate that number to a pool. Okay, that's going to be a contact object just like anything else. We need to give it a primary number, but we can also go and give that number up to 4 secondary numbers. So secondary languages. So when somebody dials in, they'll get options read to them by the conferencing announcement service in terms of how they would actually use, you know, what language they want to select. And then we've had a look at this in terms of the dialing conferencing. So those are the key points. Another thing that you might come across is you might want to change the order, okay, that it actually applies within if we looked at where I actually selected what number to select in that list there, it comes and tells you what number. You can play with those and change those around. You can also change the order as represented in your dialing conferencing page. Okay, so for that you would use this CS dialing conferencing access number, and you would set priorities to each of those particular contact objects, and that would determine how they would sit up in that one.
So when you do the Lync meeting in email,
yeah,
you can flip the toll-free number and the local number?
You can, where I went here,
Our users are kind of lazy.
yeah.
And even if they're local, they still click the 800 number. You charge for it. I would love to flip that.
So yeah, I was talking about this. Oops. Forgotten my password. So this list over here, you can change the order of that. Okay. And so you could obviously, wherever your dial plan is going to be what you have at the top. But you can go in and flip this around using that PowerShell command. And when you do it here, it's going to do it in the web page as well.
Okay. So
Okay.
can we do it per meeting, or can we do like a global apply?
You can go and set this up. Okay. You can go and change this, a global apply. Okay. But they can still come in and change that if they want. Okay.
They're lazy. I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, if they're not going to select that, they're not going to go and change it either. So.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, we touched on conferencing directories. Main takeaway here is if you want to reduce that conference ID, so this really goes down to someone sitting there and punching through the numbers that could be on the subway. Believe it or not, 1 or 2 digits extra makes quite a difference. Okay, so if they're sitting there and they have to, go through 10 digits as opposed to 9 on the subway, that can be quite grumpy. Or when you're driving, it's quite a challenge as well. So you want to reduce that, and the way we reduce that is for creating a conferencing directory for every 999 users. So we can actually bring that down. You would have noticed earlier that within the Microsoft realm, it's so big that we need to reduce that to 9 digits. Yep.
Do the conference IDs ever age out and get usable again?
Age out, no.
So the conference
They used to.
is used once and then we never use it again for life.
Yeah, there is a conferencing life cycle in terms of how long it's there for and how long it gets archived for and things like that. So that applies. But in terms of your conference ID, in terms of your personal conference ID, that's with you as long as you're enabled for that modality. But a particular conference ID does have a life cycle. Like when you actually set up a unique conference ID, yeah.
And is that something we can control the life cycle, or the system controls that?
That is pretty much set. I'm not aware of if we can change that. Okay, that is pretty much set, but we can take that offline, and I can certainly help you find that out.
Thanks.
Okay. Other things to consider is your conferencing announcement or conferencing auto attendant. Okay, scoping that. So you're going to have one of those for each region. Okay, and you want to figure out how you're going to scope those and apply those to each region. From a capacity perspective, we've got a couple of tools out there that hopefully will help you. We spoke very briefly about our bandwidth calculator. The bandwidth calculator is really good in terms of scoping how many lines you need. So you need to have, if you're looking at moving from like an ACP, you need to have visibility in terms of how many minutes you're actually using on a monthly basis, so you can actually pull those in and do the Erlang calculation in terms of how many PRIs you're going to need for that one. So we also have a capacity planning guide. So the first step that we're going to do is modeling and usage and work out your bandwidth. The bandwidth calculator is the first thing, okay, and you can refer to the capacity planning guide for that, for guidance on that as well. The next one is use the planning tool. So we have the Lync 2013 planning tool, which a lot of people probably familiar with. Pretty intuitive GUI type system. The other thing that not a lot of people use is our capacity planning tool, which gets updated on a regular basis. Okay, so that can be downloaded. And then we've also developed a stress testing tool and performance tool that you can run against it to just see exactly to what level and how many calls that dial-in conferencing is going to take on that particular scaling. So that's pretty important. Then obviously rollout, you would have it already. How many people here we actually have dial-in conferencing deployed within the organization? Okay, so for those of you that have had Lync or do have Lync, really not very difficult to do. Okay, deploy it, advertise it with the meetings, keep an eye on your monitoring in terms of how users are using it. Okay, your monitoring service is good for that. And then base your scaling on that. Take it from there if you're considering using it. So really do an internal pilot based on that. And then obviously it just comes down to standard maintenance going forward. In terms of capacity, these are general. They're not very specific to dial-in conferencing per se. But when you're actually setting up your conferencing infrastructure, this is the type of user modeling you should be using. Okay. Key one to call out just at the bottom here is in terms of media mix. For audio, we're looking at 15% of all your audio traffic coming in is dial-in conferencing type traffic. Okay. The rest is pretty much VoIP traffic or conferencing audio, internal conferencing audio type stuff. So understand what your user models are going to be. This is very key in terms of setting up your personas. Okay, when we get back to the bandwidth calculator. Okay, bandwidth calculator, the starting point for that is our user models. And you might be wondering where all these numbers have come from. Obviously, from across many of our customers, across our own environment. This is generally what we see is the starting point for user models. Okay. You may be higher, you may be less, but this is pretty much a good starting point for you. Recommended hardware. So when we look at a front-end pool of up to 12 front-ends, that'll support 80,000. But the key thing to remember here is 6,660. It's a bit of an evil number, but so we can host up to that number on a particular front-end server. So that's also key to think about. Bandwidth considerations. So you really need to consider, when it comes to bandwidth, where are your conferences going to be hosted, okay? And where are your mediation servers? Okay, bear in mind that there's a route between a mediation server and where that conference is, okay? If that's in the same site, great. But if that's now crossing WANs and that's how you've set your link up, you need to consider that as over the WAN type PSTN calling, okay? It is in the bandwidth calculator, there is a component there to say I have a local voice breakout. or not, which will help you with those bandwidth calculations. But it's pretty important that you just understand your traffic flows, understand where your mediation, so your entry points are, and where your MCUs are going to be hosted. That's critical from a bandwidth perspective. So go do's. Go deploy PSTN conferencing. That's pretty much all I got to say about that. No, go do's is if you look at your traditional ACP type experience, okay, which again we go back is looking at about 80, we can save 85% of this pain by just bringing this in-house on the solution that you already have. It's really, we can avoid that frustrating type join experience where we have to, dial in, put in a code, put in another code, put in a password manager. We can stop that by using our mobile client, obviously as the first choice, okay, because that's a lot easier authentication and join experience, okay. Also, the experience from any kind of phone, a PBX phone or a cell phone, that is also pretty pleasant. You know your number, you say your name, and then you go, okay. So that's important. We've got all the main features, things like DTMF, okay, so full DTMF functionality. We've got security in our PSTN lobby. What else is there? I think we've got pretty much it all covered here. The one thing in terms this is only going to be as good as what your users use it, okay? So I kind of, Lync lives and dies by the user experience. That's no matter what modality you're speaking about, okay? And if your users are not educated, let's put it that way, or not trained in using this, then they're going to have a bad perception of this. So we had, a team developed the rollout and adoption success kit. I don't know if anyone's gone and looked at this, but this is kind of the development of our old end-user adoption training kit. And this will tell us a lot of things in terms of, this will help us with user education, user marketing, user empowerment. So we get your users to know how to use it, get them to understand how, best to use it. Be a responsible UC citizen, I call it, okay? By changing places like dial-in numbers based on where your users are going to be joining us. So there's a link there if anyone hasn't used the RAS kit. Very, very good and very handy. If you're doing it for any type of deployment. So what we need to do here, first of all, we need to plan. Then we need to build. So go build a solid foundation of your conferencing environment. Go and do specific planning around your dial-in conferencing. Understand where your ingress points are. Understand where your PRIs and where your users are and where you want to terminate. Make special consideration, to what type of PSTN technology you want to use. Do you want to use PRIs into a site? Do you want to use multiple numbers? Have a lot of, have a hunt group going into a site? Or do you want to use things like SIP trunking to give your users the best of both worlds in terms of minimizing the routing in the cloud there, so they can. Then we want to deploy it. We want to make sure that we enable the right policies at the right time, okay, to our users. Manage that centrally if we can. That's always the best. And then just run with it, empower your users, and get your users to use it, okay? Get your users empowered in terms of training and how they should be using it. I do, often with customers, we do road shows at particularly big customers and show them how to use the stuff. Show them that it's not black magic, it's pretty easy to use. And I think that's pretty much it. We've got 15 minutes for question. Yes?
I wonder if you have any insight into, we're using CAC at the site, and we have PSTN service available for the pools at a different site. Are you looking to add the functionality to do automatic reroute? Right now they would get a busy signal, so if I have capacity for 10, the 11th user calls in.
Yeah.
They're getting a busy signal, but I have PSTN capabilities to automatically reroute that. That's currently a limitation, my understanding of the product. Is that something that...
Are you talking about inbound calls, eh?
No, the user at the site wants to call in.
Yeah.
But there's no capacity on the WAN to do that.
Yeah.
My understanding is it won't automatically reroute over the PSTN to join them to where that.
A function of CAC is that you can do PSTN reroute. So provided you have resilient links there, when you set up your routing, I don't know, I'm from South Africa. But if you set up your actual resilient routes, okay, routes down the line, then it should actually see, okay, I can't get to this one. I can't make a call on this one. The next thing, it would try and use the edge server, okay? So based on its candidates, it would try and go via the edge server and do a hairpin back into the organization via the edge server and the internet. The third thing it would do is use PSTN reroute based on the existing routes it has. So it will go down the list of routes until it finds one that it can actually use. So that functionality is there today.
I've been told by our DSC that it's not an option, as well as speaking to an FCM, they said that exists, that does not, functionality does not exist.
No, it definitely does. Definitely does. But I mean, I can certainly, I mean, if anyone wants to, contact me after this, I'll gladly give you a card. But no, that's definitely been there for some time, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's, and the thing is also, coming from a phone, you can't enable CAC coming from a phone. It's only from a Lync 2013 client to a Lync 2013 client, which an MCU is, when you're joining a conference. So definitely there. But great question. We'll sort you out with this now. Yes?
The announcement with adding the PSTN lounge to Lync Online, does that include conferencing?
On Lync Online? So dial-in conferencing on-prem is not included on Lync Online, but you can get hosted provider, so ACP in the cloud, that can assist with that. Was that answer your question?
Yeah, would that be kind of like the dedicated option as well, Office 365 dedicated option?
The dedicated option is one of them, or if you're going on multi-tenant, then you would use a provider for that. So there are providers that do that, things like Clarient and that. And there are a lot, if anyone wants to go to speak to them, obviously not the objective of this particular session, but there are a number of those ACP cloud providers that integrate with Lync in the expo hall. So go and have a chat to them if you're interested in that space. Yeah?
For dial-in conferencing from, say, mobile phones,
Yeah.
does reverse number lookup work? Should it work if I have AD populated with the caller's mobile phone numbers and then they call in the conferencing? Right now it's just showing me a list of numbers that they're calling from.
Yeah.
I'd love it if it could do a reverse number lookup and actually show me,
Yeah,
how many people are there dialing in.
It will only do reverse number lookup against the tel URI, okay? So whatever their primary tel URI is, it'll figure that out, So it'll pick that up from the SIP invite when it comes in, and it'll say, okay, I've got this number. Do I have a matching tel URI for this? This is the SIP URI for it, and then that's reverse number lookup. But for secondary and third numbers, I'm not sure we can do that just yet. Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Is that it? Yeah.
We're having an issue just thinking about the migration strategy and how we have separate DTMF codes for mute and unmute.
Yeah.
And you guys just offer a toggle.
Yeah.
Are there any plans for you to put in the product the ability to have separate mute and unmute codes?
Interesting.
It seems like
yeah.
that way people could make them the same if they wanted. It could be a toggle, but for folks like us that want to replicate the current TUI, it also.
Yeah. In terms of separate commands, in terms of manipulating the existing one, sure, you can do that. But in terms of creating separate ones, I'm not sure if we can do that. But again, something I can follow up for you. Definitely. Okay, folks. Yeah.
Dial-in conference calls coming from PSTN or PBX phones will always be terminated to mediation, or can we use mediation media bypass to directly to the conference server?
They will do the media negotiation with it. It depends on the codec that it's coming in. But if it's coming in from a PSTN, if it's coming in G711, then it'll do it. But those are inbound calls. It's outbound calls that we do media bypass with. Okay.
You're saying that outbound calls will use media bypass?
Yeah, they will use media bypass if it makes sense, then it'll do it, but not inbound calls. Yeah. Right, folks, well, I want to thank you. One more. There we go.
The gentleman over there mentioned the issue of employees using toll-free numbers when a toll number would do. Are there any plans to include any screening in the product? So if we recognize someone calling on a toll-free number that could have made a local call, we could give them like an intercept. We can do that with our provider, and we've been looking at that. Like basically say there's a local number available in your area. Here's the local number.
Yeah.
But it would be nice if we could do it in the product too.
Yeah, well, Lync, I mean, you would provide the numbers, okay, and you can use your regions to provide the primary number that you want to do. In terms of manipulating that number and doing a callback, is that kind of what you?
No, really on a call-in basis. If someone's using a toll-free number when there's a local number in their area,
Yeah.
I'd like to do that all within Lync and basically say there's a local number in your area, here it is.
Yeah. It's probably something with MSPL scripts that can be done. It's not part of the product, but I'm sure that kind of thing could be done with MSPL scripts. Because we can take the SIP invite as it comes in, and we can manipulate and say, contact this, so we can do a consult, like a transfer to that number. But there's things, but there's not out the box, but there's definitely some creative things we can do there. We're done. Awesome. Thank you so much, folks, for making it out here early on last day. I hope you've had a good Lync conference. I wish you all safe travels home, wherever that might be, and I hope it's been good. See you next year. All right, cheers. Thanks. And folks, please don't forget to do your evals. And just take a shot of that.